The bucket slipped from her hand and crashed onto the marble floor, water splashing outward in a sharp, echoing slap. Several heads turned. A few people sighed loudly. One man clicked his tongue in annoyance. "Oh, for heaven's sake," a woman muttered, lifting her expensive heels to avoid the spreading puddle. "Can't you be careful?" Mrs. Grace Adebayo froze. Her hands trembled as she bent slowly, joints aching, to grab the fallen mop. Her heart pounded, not from the spill but from the sudden attention. She hated moments like this. Moments when the world noticed her only because she had made a mistake. "I'm sorry, Ma," she said quietly, her voice barely carrying over the hum of the Sterling Crown Tower lobby. No one responded. The receptionist behind the desk rolled her eyes and returned to her screen. Two executives walked past, stepping over the water as if she were part of the mess. A security guard watched for a second, then looked away. Grace wiped the floor again and again, her movements practiced, mechanical. She had been doing this job for nearly 6 years. Long enough to know that apologies meant nothing when people had already decided who you were. Just a cleaner. By the time the floor was dry, the lobby had swallowed her again. Conversations resumed. Laughter floated through the air. Shoes clicked against marble. Grace pushed her cart toward the elevators, shoulders slightly hunched, eyes down. She did not see the young man watching her from the glass doors as she disappeared down the hallway. Sterling Crown Tower stood 35 stories tall, a monument to wealth and power in the heart of the city. Its tenants were law firms, investment groups, tech startups, and multinational corporations. People came here to make deals worth millions, sometimes billions. Grace cleaned their offices. She arrived every morning at 5 a.m., long before the building came alive. 2 buses and a long walk brought her there. By the time she clocked in, the sun was usually just beginning to rise, painting the city gold. She liked those quiet moments. The building felt kinder then, as if it hadn't yet decided to be cruel. She worked through the floors methodically, humming hymns under her breath. Her uniform was always neat, though faded from years of washing. Her shoes were worn but polished. Dignity, she believed, was something you carried inside, not something others gave you. Still, the way people spoke to her weighed on her more than she admitted. "Cleaner, you missed a spot." "Cleaner, this trash should have been emptied already." "Cleaner, are you deaf?" They never used her name. Most didn't know it. Grace never corrected them. On the 21st floor, she stopped outside a glass-walled office as voices drifted out. "I swear these people are everywhere," a man said, his tone sharp with irritation. "You'd think they'd clean at night so we don't have to see them." Another voice laughed. "What do you expect? That's their world. Buckets and mops." Grace stood still, fingers tightening around the handle of her cart. She waited until the laughter faded before moving again. She had learned long ago that reacting only gave people permission to wound you deeper. Later that morning, as the building filled up, Grace made her way to the executive floors. That was where Victor Lang worked. Victor Lang was a senior operations manager for a powerful investment firm that occupied 3 floors of Sterling Crown Tower. He was known for his sharp suits, sharper tongue, and complete lack of patience. He noticed everything that inconvenienced him. And Grace inconvenienced him often, simply by existing. Cleaner. Grace paused, already knowing the voice. Victor stood in the doorway of his office, coffee cup in hand, brow furrowed. He glanced down at the carpet, then back at her, as if disappointed she was still there. "Didn't I tell you yesterday this area needs extra attention?" he said. "Yes, sir," Grace replied calmly. "I cleaned it this morning." Victor took a deliberate step forward and tipped his cup. Dark coffee spilled onto the beige carpet. "Well," he said, shrugging, "now you can clean it again." A few people nearby snickered. Grace's chest tightened. For a moment, something flickered behind her eyes, hurt, maybe anger, but it vanished just as quickly. She set down her cart and knelt, blotting the spill with practiced care. Victor watched for a second, satisfaction curling at the corner of his mouth, before turning back into his office. "Make sure it's spotless this time," he added over his shoulder. Grace didn't answer. What Victor didn't see was the way her hands shook slightly as she worked, or how she pressed her lips together to keep them from trembling. What he didn't know was that this woman, kneeling on the floor beneath him, had once stood in front of classrooms full of children, teaching them to read, to dream, to believe in their worth. What he didn't know was that she had raised a son alone after his father died, working multiple jobs so that boy could study, could rise, could become more than the world expected of him. What he didn't know was that every insult she swallowed had been swallowed for years, not because she believed them but because she believed in peace. Around noon, Grace retreated to the small janitorial closet for her break. She sat on a folding chair, unwrapped her lunch and bowed her head briefly in thanks. Rice and vegetables. Simple. Enough. Her phone vibrated in her pocket. She smiled before even checking the screen. Daniel. She answered on the second ring. Hello, my son. Mom? Daniel's voice came through warm and familiar. Did I catch you on your break? Yes, she said, her smile widening. How are you? There was a pause. Busy, he admitted. Always busy. I saw your message last night. Are you sure you're okay? Grace hesitated, then chuckled softly. I'm fine. Work is work. You don't have to keep doing that job, Daniel said gently. You know that. I know, she replied. But I like being useful. And I like meeting people. Daniel didn't argue, but concern lingered in his silence. Just promise me you're being treated well. Grace looked at the scuffed floor, at the shelves of cleaning supplies, at her reflection in the metal door. She straightened her shoulders. Yes, she said. I promise. She ended the call before he could say more. Grace returned to work, unaware that this promise, spoken out of love, was already beginning to crack. And somewhere high above the city, events were quietly moving into place that would force the truth into the open. The afternoon dragged on with the slow heaviness that always settled into Grace's bones by midweek. Her knees ached as she pushed her cart down the hallway, stopping to wipe fingerprints from glass doors and straighten chairs that had been pushed back carelessly. People passed her without looking, voices raised in phone calls, shoes moving too fast, lives too important. On the 23rd floor, she paused outside the conference room. Through the glass, a meeting was in progress. Executives sat around a long table, laptops open, coffee cups steaming. Victor Lang stood near the screen, gesturing sharply as he spoke. We're behind schedule, he snapped. And I don't care whose fault it is. I want results, not excuses. Grace waited patiently as she always did until the meeting ended. When the room finally emptied, she entered quietly, gathering discarded cups and napkins. Hey, a voice said. She turned to see a young man still seated at the table. He couldn't have been more than 25. His suit was slightly rumpled, his tie loosened. He smiled awkwardly. Sorry about earlier, he said, gesturing vaguely toward Victor's office. He's like that with everyone. Grace nodded politely. It's all right. I'm Ethan, he added. Junior analyst. Grace, she replied. He blinked. Grace, he repeated as if testing the sound of it. Nice to meet you. She smiled, genuinely this time, and continued cleaning. Ethan watched her for a moment, then stood to leave. Have a good day, he said. You too, Grace replied. Small moments like that mattered more to her than people realized. But kindness was rare currency in Sterling Crown Tower. By late afternoon, tension crackled through the building. Whispers moved from floor to floor. Emails were sent and deleted. Something was wrong. Grace noticed it first in the way security guards spoke urgently into their radios. Then in the way managers paced hallways, brows furrowed. On the executive floors, doors closed more often than usual. On the 32nd floor, she overheard two assistants whispering near the printer. Did you hear? One murmured. The board is furious. About the audit? The other replied. Yes. Apparently someone's been cooking numbers. Grace kept her eyes down but her ears sharp. She had learned long ago that people spoke freely around her. They assumed she wasn't listening. Or worse, that she couldn't understand. Later, as she cleaned near Victor's office again, she heard shouting. This is a disaster. Victor barked. Do you have any idea what this could cost us? A muffled reply followed, then silence. Grace hesitated, then knocked gently on the open doorframe. Sir, I need to empty the bin. Victor spun around, irritation flaring instantly. Can't you see I'm busy? I'll be quick, she said softly. He sighed dramatically, stepping aside. Fine. Just don't touch anything else. As Grace reached for the trash, her elbow brushed the edge of his desk. A folder slid slightly, revealing a stack of documents stamped confidential. Victor's hand slammed down over them. Watch it, he snapped. Grace recoiled. I'm sorry. Just get out, he said. You people are always in the way. Something inside her shifted then, not anger, not sadness, but a quiet, weary resolve. She finished her task and left without another word. By the time she reached the elevator, her chest felt tight. She pressed a hand over her heart, breathing slowly. She had endured worse in life. Hunger, loss, fear. But humiliation had a way of cutting deeper when it came unexpectedly. The next morning began like any other. Grace arrived early, clocked in, and started on the lower floors. The city outside was gray with rain, droplets streaking down the windows. She liked rainy days. They softened the world. At 9:17 a.m., everything unraveled. She was mopping near the reception area of the 21st floor when a shout echoed down the hallway. "Stop her." Grace froze as two security guards rushed toward her. "Ma'am," one said sharply, blocking her path. "We need you to come with us." Confusion flooded her face. "Is something wrong?" "You were seen near the executive offices last night," the other guard said. "A laptop went missing." Grace's mouth fell open. "What? I would never." "Save it," the first guard said. "We'll sort it out downstairs." People emerged from offices, drawn by the commotion. Whispers spread instantly. "A laptop? From whose office?" "I heard it was Lang's." Grace felt every eye on her as the guards escorted her toward the elevator. Her hands shook. Her mind raced. This had to be a mistake. In the security office, she sat across from a stern-faced supervisor. Victor Lang stood nearby, arms crossed. "That's her," he said. "I saw her leaving my office late yesterday." Grace stared at him in disbelief. "Sir, that's not true." "She had access," Victor continued. "And frankly, it wouldn't surprise me. People get desperate." The words stung more than the accusation itself. The supervisor turned to Grace. "Do you have anything to say?" Her throat tightened. "I didn't take anything," she said quietly. "I swear." Victor scoffed. "Of course you did." Minutes stretched into an hour. They searched her bag. Found nothing. Still, suspicion lingered. "We'll need to suspend you while we investigate," the supervisor said finally. Grace's heart sank. "Suspend me?" "Without pay," he added. Victor smirked faintly. "Standard procedure." Grace stood slowly, her legs weak. "May I at least finish today's work?" The supervisor shook his head. "You'll need to leave the building." As she walked out, escorted once again by security, the humiliation burned hotter than any insult she had ever endured. People watched openly now. Some with curiosity. Some with judgment. A few with pity. No one spoke up. Outside, the rain soaked her uniform within seconds. Grace stood under the awning, unsure what to do next. Her phone buzzed in her pocket. "Daniel." She stared at the screen for a long moment before answering. "Mom?" His voice was immediate, alert. "What's wrong?" Her composure broke then. Not completely, but enough. "Daniel," she said softly, "today, they treated me like I didn't matter." There was silence on the line. Then very quietly he said, "Who?" Grace looked back at the towering glass building, rain blurring its edges. "The people I cleaned for," she replied. And somewhere miles away, Daniel Adebayo straightened in his chair, his expression hardening as pieces began to fall into place. The calm he had learned from his mother was still there. But beneath it, something else stirred. Something dangerous. Daniel did not raise his voice. He did not shout or curse or demand answers in that moment. That was not how his mind worked. Instead, he listened. He asked his mother to breathe. He asked where she was standing. He asked if she was safe. "I'm outside," Grace said, rain pattering loudly around her. "I can take the bus home." "No," Daniel said firmly. "Wait where you are. I'll handle this." She smiled weakly even though he couldn't see it. "My son, it's all right. These things happen." "They shouldn't," he replied. And then softer, "Not to you." When the call ended, Daniel sat still for several seconds, staring at the city skyline outside his office window. From 40 floors up, the world looked orderly, controlled, predictable. It wasn't. He picked up his phone again, this time dialing another number. "Get me everything on Sterling Crown Tower," he said when the call connected. "Ownership structure. Major tenants. Board members. Especially Victor Lang." There was a pause. "Today," Daniel added. Within minutes, messages began flooding his screen. Names. Percentages. Financials. Red flags. Daniel leaned back in his chair, jaw tightening. He had invested in dozens of properties through holding companies, trusts, and partnerships. Sterling Crown Tower was one of them. Not the largest. Not the most important. But it was there. And his mother was there too. Back at the building, Grace finally boarded a bus home. The ride felt longer than usual. Each stop dragged. Each bump jolted her nerves. She replayed the morning over and over in her mind, searching for something she had done wrong. Had she stayed too long on that floor? Had she spoken out of turn? Had someone planted the idea because it was easy? When she reached her small apartment, she hung her uniform to dry and sat on the edge of the bed, hands folded in her lap. The silence pressed in around her. She had survived many things in her life. But this hurt in a different way. Not because of the job, but because of the eyes, the looks, the way people had already decided her guilt before anyone spoke. Her phone buzzed again. Daniel. Mom, he said gently. I need you to answer one question honestly. Yes. Did you take anything from that building? Grace's back straightened. No, she said without hesitation. Never. That's all I needed, he replied. The next morning, Sterling Crown Tower buzzed with unusual activity. An email went out just before 9 a.m. Mandatory all-staff meeting, executive boardroom, 10 a.m. Speculation spread instantly. What's going on? Is this about the audit? I heard investors are furious. Victor Lang read the email twice, irritation flickering across his face. He straightened his tie, confident as ever. If this was about the missing laptop, he had already pointed the finger. At 9:58 a.m., the boardroom filled. Executives, managers, legal advisors. The atmosphere was tense, thick with anticipation. The door opened at exactly 10 o'clock. A man stepped in. He was tall, composed, impeccably dressed in a dark suit that seemed to absorb the light around him. His presence shifted the room instantly. Conversations died mid-sentence. Some recognized him immediately. Others felt it in their gut. Daniel Adebayo walked to the head of the table and set a slim folder down. Good morning, he said calmly. Thank you for coming on such short notice. Victor's eyes narrowed. He leaned toward a colleague. Who is this? The colleague's face had gone pale. That's Daniel Adebayo. Victor frowned. So, the man whispered urgently. He's one of the largest private investors in the city. Daniel looked around the room, his gaze steady, unflinching. I'll be brief, he said. Yesterday, an employee of this building was publicly accused of theft. Escorted out. Suspended without pay. Murmurs rippled through the room. Daniel opened the folder and slid a photograph across the table. Grace. In her uniform. Standing outside the building in the rain. Victor's breath caught. That woman, Daniel continued evenly, is my mother. Silence fell like a dropped glass. Victor's mouth opened, then closed. Daniel let the moment stretch. He wanted them to feel it. The weight of realization. The discomfort. She has worked here for 6 years, Daniel said. She has never received a complaint. Never taken a day off she didn't earn. And yesterday she was humiliated based on an assumption. Victor found his voice. Now hold on. Daniel's eyes snapped to him. The room seemed to shrink. You accused her, Daniel said quietly. Without evidence. Victor swallowed. A laptop went missing from my office. She was there late. And the laptop? Daniel asked. Victor hesitated. It was found. In a meeting room. After my mother was escorted out, Daniel said. No one spoke. Daniel straightened. I want to be very clear. I'm not here to ask for apologies. I am here to ask questions. He turned to the board. What kind of culture allows someone to be treated as disposable based on their job title? No one answered. Daniel closed the folder. Effective immediately, an independent review will be conducted. Leadership will be evaluated. Security procedures reassessed. Victor's face flushed. You can't just. Daniel cut him off. I can. He paused, then added, and I will. By the time the meeting ended, word had spread through the building like wildfire. The cleaner was the billionaire's mother. People whispered in elevators. Eyes widened. Regret crept in. That afternoon, Grace received a call. Mrs. Adebayo, a voice said formally. This is Sterling Crown Management. We'd like to invite you back for a conversation. Grace closed her eyes. Thank you, she replied. But I won't be returning. On the other end of the line, the silence was thick. What no one realized yet was that the story was far from over. And the consequences were only beginning. Sterling Crown Tower had never felt so unsettled. The usual confidence that filled its hallways was gone, replaced by something brittle and uncertain. People lowered their voices when they spoke. Laughter sounded forced. Even the elevators seemed quieter, as if the building itself were holding its breath. Victor Lang sat in his office staring at his phone. It hadn't stopped buzzing all morning. Emails from HR. Calendar updates mysteriously disappearing. A meeting request marked urgent. He wiped sweat from his brow. This wasn't how things were supposed to go. He had told himself he'd done nothing wrong. That accusing the cleaner had been logical. Convenient. that people like her were always a risk. But now the narrative had flipped. Now he was the risk. At noon HR called him in. The room was small, windowless. Two people sat across from him, faces unreadable. A third joined them on a screen, an external consultant Daniel had personally appointed. Mr. Lang, one of them began, this meeting concerns your conduct towards staff at Sterling Crown Tower. Victor scoffed lightly. This is about that woman again? The consultant leaned forward. Mrs. Adebayo. Victor waved a dismissive hand. Fine. This is ridiculous. I didn't know who she was. That, the consultant said calmly, is precisely the problem. Victor opened his mouth to argue, then stopped. For the first time he felt something unfamiliar creeping up his spine. Fear. Meanwhile, Grace sat at home, folding laundry slowly, deliberately. Her phone lay on the table beside her. Messages from unknown numbers had begun arriving. We're so sorry, Ma. Please come back. We didn't know. You deserve respect. She read none of them. Instead, she brewed tea and sat by the window, watching the rain taper off into a soft drizzle. Her hands were steady now. Her breathing calm. She had cried once quietly the night before. Then she had slept. Years of hardship had taught her that storms passed, even when they felt endless. A knock came at the door. Grace rose carefully and opened it to find Daniel standing there. He looked tired. Not the polished exhaustion of boardrooms and deals, but the heavy kind that came from emotion held too tightly for too long. Mom, he said softly. She stepped aside and he entered, pulling her into a gentle embrace. They called me, she said as they Saturday, they want me back. I know, Daniel replied. They also want to apologize. Publicly. Grace smiled faintly. And what do you want? Daniel hesitated. I want justice. She reached for his hand. Justice doesn't always look like punishment. He met her eyes, surprised. I don't want them destroyed, she continued. I want them changed. Daniel exhaled slowly. He had built empires. He had dismantled competitors. But this required a different kind of strength. Then let me do it your way, he said. 2 days later, Sterling Crown Tower held another meeting. This time not behind closed doors. Employees gathered in the lobby. Cleaners, security, receptionists, executives. All standing together, no hierarchy, no private offices to hide behind. Daniel stood at the front. Grace stood beside him. The sight alone sent a ripple through the crowd. This building runs because of every single person in it, Daniel said, his voice clear. Not just the ones with titles. He gestured gently toward his mother. This woman raised me. She taught me respect, discipline, and humility. And she was treated here as if she were invisible. Grace looked out at the faces before her. Some were ashamed. Some were curious. A few were crying. I don't blame anyone, she said quietly when it was her turn to speak. But I ask you to see people before you judge them. Her voice wavered just slightly. Work does not define worth. Silence followed. Heavy. Honest. Then applause began. Slowly at first. Then louder. Louder still. Victor Lang was not present. Later that day an internal announcement went out. Victor Lang has been terminated effective immediately. Policies were revised. Training mandated. Reporting systems strengthened. But more importantly, conversations changed. People said hello to the cleaners. They learned names. They listened. Grace never returned to her job. Instead, Daniel funded a community education center in her name, offering free classes to adults and children alike. Grace volunteered there twice a week. On the wall by the entrance hung a simple plaque. Dignity does not come from position but from character. Months passed. Sterling Crown Tower still stood tall. Deals were made. Money flowed. But something invisible had shifted. Because every time someone passed a cleaner in the hallway, a question lingered in their mind. Were they really? And more importantly, how should I treat them? One evening, Grace and Daniel sat together, sharing tea. You changed a lot of lives, Daniel said. Grace smiled. So did you. He shook his head. I learned it from you. She squeezed his hand, pride shining softly in her eyes. The world had finally seen her. Not because of who her son was, but because of who she had always been. The days that followed were quieter but not calmer. Grace noticed it first when she went to the market near her apartment. People whispered as she passed. Someone pointed discreetly. A woman selling vegetables smiled at her with a kind of awe. Good afternoon, Ma, the woman said respectfully. You're the one, from the building, yes? Grace nodded politely. Good afternoon. Word had traveled fast. Too fast for her liking. At the community center Daniel had helped establish, parents lingered longer than usual. They watched her as she helped children with reading exercises, her voice patient, steady, familiar. Some parents approached her hesitantly. "You raised him very well," one man said, nodding with admiration. Grace smiled, but there was a heaviness behind it. "I raised a child," she replied. He chose who to become. That distinction mattered to her. Daniel, on the other hand, was dealing with the aftermath in ways Grace never fully saw. Boardrooms were colder now. Executives were more careful around him. Some treated him with exaggerated respect. Others with thinly veiled resentment. He noticed it all. During a private meeting one afternoon, an advisor leaned forward and said, "You made a powerful statement. But you also made enemies." Daniel nodded calmly. If respect creates enemies, they were never allies. At Sterling Crown Tower, changes continued to ripple outward. Cleaning staff were no longer scheduled during peak hours. Not to hide them, but to respect their work. Break rooms were renovated. Wages adjusted. Security procedures rewritten to remove assumptions based on job roles. Ethan, the junior analyst, became an unexpected advocate. He spoke openly in meetings about what he had witnessed. He called out dismissive language. Others followed. One evening, as the sun dipped behind the skyline, Grace received a call from an unfamiliar number. "Mrs. Adebayo," a hesitant voice said. "This is Victor Lang." Grace closed her eyes briefly. "Yes," she replied. There was a pause thick with regret. "I don't expect forgiveness," he said. "I just wanted you to know. I was wrong." Grace considered her response carefully. "I hope you learned from it," she said gently. "That's all." The line went dead. She set the phone down and exhaled slowly. Forgiveness was not something she gave lightly, but she had learned that carrying bitterness only weighed down the soul. Weeks later, Daniel invited her to attend a small event. No press. No cameras. Just a handful of people. When Grace arrived, she realized it was the official opening of the education center. Children ran past her laughing. The walls were painted warm colors. Bookshelves lined the room. Daniel stood near the front, speaking quietly to a group of volunteers. When he saw her, his face softened. "This place feels right," she said, looking around. "It does," he agreed. "Because of you." She shook her head. "Because of what people choose to become when they're given a chance." That evening, after everyone had left, Grace lingered in the empty hall. She ran her fingers along the spines of the books, feeling a deep, steady peace settle in her chest. She thought of the building. The marble floors. The spilled coffee. The rain. She thought of all the times she had been invisible. And she realized something important. Her story had never been about being a cleaner. It had been about being human in a world too quick to forget that others are human too. Months later, Sterling Crown Tower installed a new training program. The opening video featured no executives. No charts. Just a quiet clip of a woman mopping a floor at dawn. A voiceover played. "You never know whose life you're stepping into. Choose kindness." Grace never saw the video herself. She didn't need to. She was too busy helping a young girl sound out her first full sentence, clapping softly when the child got it right. Outside, the city kept moving. Buildings rose. People hurried. But somewhere in the noise, a lesson endured. Not everyone who looks small is powerless. Not everyone who is quiet is weak. And sometimes the person you overlook is the reason someone great exists at all. The end.